Is what it was and what it shall be. We're back again. Today's video is called Spirit War Boot Camp number 89, and this is entitled Quantum Biology for Wizards. How's everyone doing? I'm doing so great. So, most of you probably don't know that back in 2019, I started making informational videos for the first time. And in the beginning of January 1st, 2020, I started a new series, which I call Wizarding School. And back all the way back then, I was talking about this without knowing what I was talking about. So, in other words, I was talking about quantum coherence. I was talking about, there's a video I made called The Mysticism of Optics and Light, talking about how all reality is mediated by the exchange of photons and that all physical matter is mediated and sustained through exchanging these tiny quantum particles of light. Okay, so I knew that. I was also talking about something that I was calling silica and carbon nanotubes, which I just barely come across and didn't really understand very well. And so now here it is, 2026, and a few months, maybe 6 months ago, I started looking into this thing called OR theory, which is basically explaining the physical exact mechanism of everything that I was talking about, how all the cells in the body communicate with each other instantaneously, non-locally, right, through the medium of coherent light. Okay, so all these things I was referencing and talking about 6 years ago, just talking off the top of my head, not knowing any of the specifics of the science behind it. So, like I said, over time, I kept hearing about, microtubules, OR theory, blah, blah, blah. And I heard about it. I watched a few videos about it. But just within the past 2 or 3 months, I started looking back into it and I was like, holy shit, this one topic explains everything that I've been trying to explain in all my videos. So now we're going to try and get into it and explain why that's the case. Okay, so like I mentioned quantum coherence. That was one of the earliest things that I talked about. Quantum optics, that's one of the very first things that I talked about. I also started talking about how geometry is the ruling science of all the other sciences and how it is the cornerstone of all mysticism and magic. And that's why you got a million retards on Witch Talk and stuff, and all these fools talking about Helena Blavatsky and all these idiots. And none of them, they think they're interested in magic, but they have no success with what they're doing because they don't understand what I'm about to tell you, which is the material science that's behind all magic. And geometry is and wave mechanics, those two things are the most foundational things that explain everything else. And even I didn't know how, to what extent this is the case until very recently. It's just been blowing my mind. And that's why I had like a big month-long gap without making any videos, because I was like, I need to know more information. So now I'm coming back. I've got a solid presentation. And so we're titling today's video Quantum Biology and Wizards. Okay, and why wizards have to have this quantum biology. Well, let's go back to something that I've referenced several times in my videos. And this is a fellow by the name of Alphonse Louis Constant, who most people know as Eliphas Levi. Okay, if ever there was an Illuminati who fits all the fucking check boxes, other than Athanasius Kircher, who most people don't know, a lot more people know who Alphonse Louis Constant is, largely because Eliphas Levi, who has the same last name as Anton LaVey. Anyway, so these two guys, Crowley considered himself to be the reincarnation of this guy. So who was this guy? He was a Jesuit, but he published a book in French called Ritual and Dogma of High Magic, and is probably next to Agrippa. It's probably the single most frequently quoted subject matter in terms of magic, because this guy was a good scholar. He was a Jesuit, so he had all the secret access to the secret libraries and everything. So he had good information, and he had information that was widely shared and referenced amongst all these different groups. So basically, he's a very foundational person within this thing. And he had this concept that I believe he refers to it as the astral light, right? And so what is the astral light? Well, most people would know this by the name of ether, but basically his idea is that there's a subtle substance behind the realm of all matter, and that all magic is based on the mastery of the fluidic mechanics of this substance, which he refers to as the astral light. Okay, and this is where we get later terms like the astral plane and so on like that. But according to him, if you can master the fluidics of the astral light, you could do and create anything and modify reality at will. Okay, and I know that sounds super woo. It even sounds super woo to me, unless if I hadn't had direct experiences and studied it for many decades, trying to figure out how everyone around the world and all these different systems is utilizing this or a similar concept. So in the Vedic cosmology, this would be called Akash or Akasha. This is where we get the term Akashic records. So the idea of Akash is that and this is the same exact thing that all the quantum physicists and Albert Einstein and all these tards back in the day were talking about, ether, right? The ether, the luminiferous ether, because the rationale was that since waves travel on water and sound travels through air, that all kinds of wave mechanics must have a medium that for their transmission, right? And that nobody knew what the medium of light was. And so they speculated that the medium behind light, that light propagates through, is called ether. And it is very, very subtle. From all practical intents and purposes for normal humans without scientific equipment, you could say that it's weightless, massless, colorless. Interestingly, all the exact same attributes that are given to the Tao in Chinese religion, and the same attributes that are given in various religions to describe the world of the spirit or the power of God or so on, that it's imperceptible to our human senses, right? So that's something universally that's widely agreed upon, East and West, okay? So that's interesting. Why would that be the case? Oftentimes when I see these universals like that, I'm like, there's something there. That's not nothing. It's not make-believe. It's not fantasy fairy tale. There's some core of truth behind that. Otherwise, why would people keep saying it? If it could be disproven or ridiculed by anybody, why would all nations of the world with all their different ethical systems like all agree on this fundamental constant of metaphysics, is that everything comes from nothing. Everything comes from an invisible substrate. Okay, think about a human life. Like when the human being is first gestating inside the mother's womb, like it's invisibly small. Like even with the basic microscope, like you wouldn't be able to see one little sperm cell and one egg cell. Like it's very, very fucking tiny. It's invisible to our senses. But yeah, once it's incepted, right, once that little seed is fertilized, like it grows and grows and goes from being invisible to being visible. And this is probably the primary reason why in the Vedic system and in the Tantra, the force of manifestation is always represented as a female, often as black. This is where we get the word Kali, means black, and it also means time. Okay, so if you have a doorway into something unknown, you're looking into the void of blackness, right? And so it's also symbolized by the downward pointing tetrahedron, very important. 4 sides, 3 faces on each side, right? It's the simplest Platonic solid. It's the simplest regular solid that you can form in 3 dimensions, okay? And so that's the emergence point between the 0-dimensional object and a 3-dimensional object is formed through what they call the Dharmodaya, which is basically seen as like a womb or a vagina hole, basically where things emerge into reality, just like human beings are born through this gateway. So they see our physical life as human beings as being an analogy on our dense dimension for what's up at the higher levels in the heavens or in the plasma realm and the plasma domain. Okay, so there's another entangled term which we have, which is called plasma. So plasma is extremely subtle field of energy, and oftentimes very subtle plasmas can penetrate solid objects and liquids. Okay, some people think of electrical charge as being a fluid in that sense. It's a plasmic fluid. And it can be very, very weak and unseeable, be incredibly microscopic. Like most of our body function happen in the realm of milliamperes, right? Like all our devices run on amps, but our body systems run on milliamperes. Okay, so it's like an incredibly, incredibly subtle current. And unless you have some advanced equipment, you're generally not going to be able to detect that, right? So how does this stuff move around in the body? Well, as you could see through water, just like if you pour mass amounts of water over a large surface, it's not going to flow evenly, right? It's going to find channels and, rivulets or whatever you want to call it, arroyos, right? It's going to find these little erosion pathways that it follows, okay? And when you think about the nervous system, a lot of people have these phrases like neural pathways and stuff like that, neuroplasticity, which is basically changing the pathways. And I believe that same thing. And I was studying acupuncture, and I've been studying the EEG, like whatever I could find about EEGs and stuff like that, and trying to understand human brain waves and how to control our consciousness. Because, well, I'm going to get into that. So another thing that gets thrown around a lot that maps onto this Orko-R theory is the idea of human consciousness as the basic mechanism of all the quantum processes, right? So the idea that these subtle processes occur on some level that's just probabilistic and unpredictable. And things exist in what's called a superposition of states. So if you're talking in terms of computing, it'd be like a 1 and 0 at the same time, or on off simultaneously, like layered over each other. So these are called superposition. And that if you were to ask, for example, where exactly is this one electron in some hydrogen atom, like you could never give an exact position of it without completely arresting it. So like changing it, in essence, changing it from being an electron. You change its nature in order to observe its position. So at all other times, if you don't force that collapse of the wave function, it exists in a cloud of probabilities, evenly distributed over various regions, which we call electron orbitals. And this is what I learned in high school chemistry and physics and stuff like that. And so what gets crazy is where you have crystals. You have liquid crystals, you have, and then you have solid crystals and so on. But there's also plasma crystals. I don't know when Wigner first theorized the existence of these Wigner crystals, but it was many decades ago. He predicted it, and they've recently been observed and filmed and stuff like that, and photographed more or less. So this is showing that all the states of matter exist in this highly ordered form called a crystal, and that given to its own devices, electrical current and light has certain specific types of propagation that it prefers, right? So it'll form naturally light and sound, and all these different wave phenomena will form a natural type of gradient of diffraction, right? These little bands, you always see the bands when you bend light, like it creates what's called a diffraction grading, or like a refraction pattern of these little bands, like a rainbow. Perfect example. It's a series of bands of different frequencies of light that separate. And so this tells us something about light, and it tells us something about wave mechanics. So what's been unknown is still unknown to the masses, but has been completely unknown to even science for most of our history that we know about, is the existence of these things called microtubules, which are incredibly small. Okay, now this microtubule demonstrates all these quantum principles that I've been talking about and all the core tenets of magic. It is encoded into this structure called microtubules. Okay, most importantly is geometrical regularity. Okay, so these microtubules form in a phi sequence, either a 5-8 or a 8-13 or a 13-21. So these are nested, counter-rotating, if you will, counter-rotating spirals, one clockwise, one anti-clockwise spiral, that are in a phi ratio to each other. Okay, all my geometry nerds are going to freak out once they really learn the power of this thing that we've all been talking about for so long, how powerful it is. So how powerful is it? Well, these microtubules exhibit a variety of what's called quantum coherence phenomena. Okay, so they transmit coherent light. So it's basically like a low intensity biolaser, if you will. And a lot of the light that they transmit is for signaling purposes, and it creates coherence and quantum entanglement throughout the human body. Okay, so all our nerves and brain cells and our nervous system can function as a coherent whole, and we can have super fast reactions that are too fast to be mediated by our nerve cells, right? They're mediated by this optical quantum network that's comprised of what's called microtubules. Okay, so by having this fire spiral of these extremely narrow, like 2 nanometer thick tubes, okay, number one, they create coherent fluidics by having just like a 1 atom thickness or 1 molecule of water thickness in these little tubes. Like it's incredibly small. And so a lot of people know and have been talking and telling about these different, what's called exclusion zone water, or the fourth state of water, sometimes referred to. It's not a liquid, it's not a gas, right? It's not a frozen ice, right? It's some weird other state of water that gives water most of its life-giving and health-inducing properties. And that's why people drinking bottled water kind of become retarded, and their functionality is not quite as good if you're drinking glacier water. And in fact, when epidemiologists travel around the world studying longevity of different cultures, what they find is the most single determining factor for longevity is glacial water, glacial spring water that has all the natural runoff of all the elements and it's highly crystallized, it's highly ordered, right? And it's basically what we would refer to as structured water. Okay, so the body creates structured water, which is transmitted through these microtubules, and that a lot of people argue that it's actually the water that gives all these amazing properties, but it's a combination between the properties of water, this polar fluid, okay? And so the microtubules, like I said, they're made of these counter-rotating spirals that are in a Fibonacci proportion to each other, okay? And they have alpha, beta, gamma tubulin. So there's three main protein isomers that they are based on, right? And so these alpha, beta, gamma tubulin form these spirals of Fibonacci increments, right? And they pump fluid through it, and it creates optical coherence, right? Like I'm saying, low intensity biolaser, basically. It's coherent light that repeats in a fractalized pattern, okay? So that's the other thing that I've been talking about in all my videos all the way back, is the importance of self-similarity and fractality and all the magical things that creates. And this is what allows what most people consider magic or lesser magic, right? Where you create a small scale mock-up of the thing that you want to create, to mimic it and to create a resonant nucleus for your etheric energy, this astral light that Eliphas Levi is talking about. You create an ideomorphic nucleus for this astral light to condense around and more or less manifest it into being. And part of that is the physicality, and it's the structuring, and it's self-similarity. So that's the thing about the Fibonacci sequence. It creates a self-similar spiral. So it's expanding in these incremental units that are approaching this perfect ratio, right? The golden ratio, right? And so by doing that, it's what scalable, nestable, self-similar. So it gives fractality and it gives these quantum coherence phenomena. So through self-similarity, as many magicians and people and mystics that I've studied from all say the same thing. They say self-similarity is the key to magic. Even herbalists, Paracelsus and all these different people that were herbal healers and herbal physicians going back hundreds of years, they talk about something called the doctrine of signatures, right? How when you look at a plant and the physicality structure of the plant, like how walnuts look like brains, how kidney beans look like kidneys, how tomato looks like a heart, and so on and on and on. It's because of this self-similar structure in terms of their morphology, it's telling you there's a resonance between these different things. Okay, color is another example of resonance. So that's a frequency-based resonance as opposed to a structurally based resonance. But the point is to say, when you have this phi scaling, right, it allows what's called self-assembly, right? Because there's already a built-in kind of blueprint for how it's going to grow and how it's going to be scalable, right? How you can naturally, like how all our joints in the hand, for if you measure your carpals and your metacarpals, right? They go like the length of this bone here to this bone, the second knuckle bone to the third knuckle bone to the fourth knuckle bone. Those are all in a phi Fibonacci sequence, just like these nanotubes. So it shows you the importance of that. And that's a way of holographically encoding the human blueprint and the human design. Same thing applies to individual cells in the body versus our planet Earth versus the solar system versus the atom versus the quarks and gluons and subatomic particles and whatever like that. They all obey this self-similar fractalized scaling, and that's why this has so much power. So in this instance, we're looking at ballistic conductivity, which is just like a hair's breadth away from room temperature superconductivity. Okay, so that's one of the things you get with these microtubules. You get photonic oscillation, right? Coherent oscillations of light and extremely low latency, low loss transmission of optical signaling throughout the entire human body, okay? We've all been taught and told wrong about how the body works, and chemical signaling happens. I'm not saying it's not important to know about, but I'm saying it's 1,000 times more important to understand optical signaling and this coherent electrostatics that we're seeing in the microtubules, right? So everything comes in triplets. So these tubules form in triplets, so a set of 3, right? And then the frequency bands at which these tubes will have so-called ballistic conductance, or like extremely low latency and low loss electrical conductivity, better than all the electronic devices that we have, even the high-end shit. These tubules are way better, okay? But the key is they're tuned, okay? They're tuned to specific frequency bands. It's like octaves, right? So you got a hertz, megahertz, kilohertz, gigahertz, terahertz, and so on, all the way up, scaling up and down. They're always in these in these octave frequency bands. So there's 3 frequency bands, and then there's a triplet within those bands, right? For every 3 orders of magnitude, this is like the octave of these type of frequency bands. So in other words, going from 1 to 1,000, that's 3 orders of magnitude, right? Ones, tens, hundreds, thousands. So it's 3 bands apart. And just within those, every time it goes up by 3 orders of magnitude like that, you get a triplet of frequency bands. Okay, so again, we're seeing this self-similar nested hierarchy. And so basically, all these things that people are trying to produce in the outer world, right? Like quantum computers, superconductors, lossless energy transmission, photonic signaling, optical computing, all that is existing within the body. And it's thousands, if not millions of times more efficient, more resource efficient, more time efficient, faster, more functional, more effective. Okay? So, and again, it's based on these same exact principles that I've been telling and talking about in all these videos going back 6 years now. So, and of course, I hate to do any video without bringing in the Buddha Tantra. So let's talk about how this is exactly similar to the Buddha Tantra. So one of the highest achievements, other than enlightenment itself, that you can achieve in the school of Buddhism that I follow, right, is called the light body or the rainbow body. Okay, so that's where the essence of your being, right, your physical body at the highest end, when Buddhist lamas die, okay, they go into this thing called tukdam, which basically they're slowly converting their physical body into light. Okay, and again, it's the same thing. It's this optical phenomenon, coherent optics, and it's frequency-based gradients, and that's why people see these what they call tigle, which is basically like a rainbow sphere. Okay, so it's a similar holographic field of light and energy that basically is the operating mechanism of the physical body, right? So when the physical body becomes discarded and it dies and decomposes, the light extracts itself out. Now, what's crazy is when these lamas go into that, oftentimes you see the body start to shrink as this light is produced. And so people all around will see these crazy optical effects like square rainbows, rainbow spheres floating around, going in and out through solid objects. You see what they refer to as dakinis, which in my opinion are plasma beings, right? The word dakas and dakinis refers to the noise of beating a drum. So that's telling you right there, this is an acoustic propagation phenomena. And so they see these beings, right? They're obviously intelligent. They're obviously self-organizing plasma fields that don't obey the same laws that normal objects obey, right? And they tend to fly. They're almost always seen in the sky, and they're associated with these spherical light, I guess you would call it, right? So again, whatever that essence is, this is the same exact type of thing that's being transmitted all through our body that gives us our thoughts and our perceptions, right? And so not only has this been demonstrated, right, it's been predicted through the mathematics at the first level by Penrose and people like that. They predicted these phenomena by studying these objects, right? Then they've had experimental validation. They've been able to image these things, even though they're incredibly tiny. They have good and always improving imagery of these things and showing their detailed structure, right? They've shown, like I said, super radiance, right? So that, in other words, it's kind of like when a light frequency moves into these tubes, it absorbs and oscillates in there in all these different frequency bands, and then it could re-radiate. So what that's showing you is that this is a signaling mechanism, right? It receives and it transmits signals, and oftentimes there's a delay. So in other words, that's showing you there's an exchange of information through this relay, right? And again, it's almost instantaneous. It's lossless, both in terms of optical signaling and lossless in terms of electrical conductivity. And it's always moving in these helical patterns, okay? Then it's creating what I'm calling hydraulic superfluidity, which is incredibly coherent, pumping of these tiny water molecules, right? And basically, it's a frequency tuner, like I said, so that's very useful. So all types of frequency obey this type of coherence resonance pattern, right? And so you also have these quantum principles because you have what's called delocalized electron bands in these pi orbitals. So what that allows, it's called a resonance structure in chemistry. So it allows two different spatial configurations to coexist and be more or less overlapping each other. So what that's showing you is there's a potential for this quantum superpositioning in these things. And again, the frequency layering and the frequency nesting gives you the same thing again. So what you're getting is an incredible density of what I'm calling meta information. And this has been a topic that I've been trying to get across in a lot of my videos too, which is dealing with something called information holograms, right? And like you could think of it like a magic sigil, you could think of it like a hyper sigil, because not only is it three-dimensional as opposed to two-dimensional, it's hyperdimensional because it moves and evolves, right? And it creates a self-similar resonant hologram to basically synchronize through self-similarity and resonate with all similar objects and attract, cohere, and communicate based on this self-similarity. That's largely the power of sigils. And so we're seeing all these exact same principles being demonstrated in the functionality of these microtubules, which they're now using to create room temperature, superconducting, biological quantum computers, okay? Now this is where I want to start concluding the video, because one of the big motives why I'm doing these right now is because AI has come to dominate the narrative all over the world for multiple years now, and it's only ratcheting up exponentially. And I think now is the time for this to be made very clear and for people to understand this, because our biology, if we're not overly brain damaged, right, if we can eat a healthy diet and have clean, pure, structured water, and have healthy minerals and stuff like that, which a lot of people don't. And if we can avoid electromagnetic pollution to the best of our capacity, right? And to create ourselves in our own energy body as a coherent, energetic soliton, right? So it's highly stable. It rejects all decoherent frequencies and bounces them off so that they don't interfere with us, right? So we're creating this solitonic principle. What's the medium that allows that energetic soliton to function in the human body? The nervous system and the microtubule network, okay? How do you charge it? You charge it with light, you charge it with vibration, and you charge it with coherence. Those are the three things that get this thing strong and strengthen it and amplify it and give it persistence beyond this dimension, beyond our single human life, right? What is it that allows that? It's a function of coherence. How do we strengthen the coherence? We do vibrations. We do repetitive rituals that go on and on and on, predictably at intervals and time cycles. Just like these frequency bands in the microtubules, we establish a macro scale frequency band through ritual and repetition. This has been demonstrated by every religion around the world since the beginning of time. This is one of the things they all agree on, if they're functional at least. So AI is no match for us, okay, first of all. Second of all, this is the important thing that I want to get across. The AI that is biologically based, that is based on room temperature biological specimens that are self-replicating, self-generating, self-assembling, how much more efficient is that than these gigantic, massive data centers at Starbase, Texas, and whatever, with these nuclear reactors and all this crazy ass shit? That is 100% not only unnecessary, but it's retarded, okay? It is so inefficient. And I think at the peak level, they know this, right? So what they're telling us they're doing and why is not the real reason, okay? It does not make sense to go around the world and mine all these metals and do all this pollution. They're not trying to really create supercomputers. If they were, they would make them biological, okay, first of all. And they would use the principles of total efficiency, superconductivity, non-locality, everything like that. All that is like a level up beyond even the best shit in the world. And no matter how many mines they dig and no matter how smaller they get the microchips, it's never ever going to be a competitor to what these systems are like, okay? So now you've got a question, well, if they know that, if that's obvious, why are they doing things the way they're doing it? Well, because it's not about that. It's not about real computing. It's not about efficiency. It's not about intelligent AI. It's not about any of these kind of performance related issues whatsoever. What is it about? Resource monopoly, okay? Resource networks, and basically because what they're really creating is a system of complete control for the entire economy. right? So now because they want to go rezone everything, they want to create smart cities or freedom cities or whatever it is you want to call it. It's a complete slave grid from top to bottom all over the world. That's what they're trying to do in Greenland. That's what they're doing in Gaza right now. That's what they're doing all over the world. That's why all these fires are happening, all these weather events are happening, because they can't just go in and rezone everything. People would protest and they would reject that. So they got to burn down